this is probably not in like really, this is most likely a lukewarm take, but kind of with the rapid title switches kind of happening around the industry and the major promotions, it's kind of got me thinking about the idea and value kind of title reigns in general, and why I think that short title reigns are always going to be weaker than long, effective, great character building reigns. In general, I think a long title reign is always going to be better in almost every case than short title reigns. I think there are a few couple of exceptions that we can kind of go over right now. I think within this year specifically, I'm kind of going to talk about those in terms of like, we had a great short title reign, in AEW with Darby Allin, for example. But we'll get into that kind of later more into the video. But just in general, kind of with specifically kind of how the WWE title has kind of been kind of hot potatoed within kind of right after Cody's first year-long reign, when John Cena then kind of took the belt, and then him and Cody kind of traded the belt. It kind of felt right there in that moment that we stopped kind of really valuing and booking a title or a champion based on the title reign itself, and more about the melodrama, I guess, of whatever needs to happen next. This is where we're going to put the belt. I do think WWE does kind of book in that way most of the time anyway, usually. Something like a Roman Reigns title reign usually doesn't really happen unless it's like, a lot of, like with Brock, for example, just not being present. Therefore, these numbers are kind of elongated due to the lack of weekly presence, with someone like Roman Reigns, who, obviously now is in a limited time schedule and stuff. There is still, that there was still that consistency of him being on the majority of shows and programming, even with the sparse defenses that were spread out. I do think it made it, every time that he did defend, feel special as well, which is what I think we have lost in this day and age in terms of or at least in WWE, in terms of making title reigns themselves feel grand. It's funny too, because what did start off WWE's era of success in this modern age, and at least in the 2020s specifically, was really that bloodline storyline that was due to the record-breaking 1,300-day title reign that Roman Reigns did have. A lot of people at the time, even me included, were kind of up in arms a lot of the times at certain opponents like a Matt Riddle and stuff like that, but the great melodrama that happened with, like, him fighting Cesaro, him fighting Riddle, the melodrama of the Clash in the Castle match between him and Drew. There were so many points in this reign for Reigns where, no pun intended, where the title felt like it was in Pearl. It was the perfect time to give it to somebody else, and it wasn't done. But in that, it didn't like hurt Drew, for example. He maintained his stock as a top level performer, kind of due not due to that performance, as he was already consistently at that level, but that didn't hurt his performance. Same thing with Sami Zayn when he was initially contending for Reigns' title in that Elimination Chamber match that him and Reigns had a couple years back, right before Mania. Right there you had the crazy fanfare, I think, more actually now than when Sami did win the WWE title back then, just because of how the storyline and everything was coinciding. And unfortunately, while he didn't win it, it felt in that moment that he kind of earned that level of respect and admiration, as he came super close to it right there, and everyone was super on board for it to potentially happen, right? I think that's what's more important kind of about titles and reigns in general too, is that with Sami Zayn, for example, winning the WWE title, and like a Darby Allin winning the AEW title, I think this is more on, I think maybe my bias is showing, because I think at least with Darby Allin's title reign, they did a good job of quantifying and giving us an actual storyline reason as to why his reign was so short, and it's pretty obvious with the burst of the title defenses and stuff that essentially happened, that were or the epitome of Darby's character, that self-sacrifice that did, it might have led him to the title, right? But it ended up, being the candle, right, that he was burning on both ends, which he constantly said every single week. We were constantly reminded, and even commentary was even reprimanding him to a point, right, where we knew at some point Darby's, candles and his fire was going to burn out. It's a different type of story compared to when Sami Zayn, wins this title in a triple threat from what I'm hearing. I've not watched the match. I've not kept up with WWE since Mania in terms of actually watching the week-to-week shows. All I see is the social media coverage essentially right now, just because it's not been entertaining enough for me to justify even covering it on a week-to-week basis or even watching it for my own leisure. So, this is more hearsay and cliff notes of essentially, what I've heard of what they've been doing with the WWE title. And even in the moments that I have seen, I think the surprise roll-up for Zayn, him beating Cody Rhodes, absolute positive in that regard in terms of the storytelling that you can bring forward between Sami and Cody potentially. But I do think that Sami finally winning the big run, especially in this situation where it wasn't necessarily as contrived as, it could have been, like in Elimination Chamber, back when he was part of the Bloodline breaking away, where that felt a lot more like it would have made probably more sense storyline wise anyway. For it to kind of happen here to in Saudi, and then for him to lose a title, essentially the next defense at Raw, to me doesn't it devalues not only the title, but it devalues the whole promotion, if that makes sense. And not because specifically Sami Zayn won it, but if the idea that, I do agree there's an idea in then attaining the championship and then defending the championship. However, you kind of neglect that idea when you say that certain people can attain the title but then never defend it. As if, the level of caliber it takes to then eventually win or become a WWE champion isn't the level of caliber it takes to defend that same title, which wouldn't really make sense because the crop of opponents and people you would have defeated would be literally the same people if you win that title and then if you were to defend that title. So in general, I think anytime they do a short reign like this specifically, all it does is make everyone kind of look weak. It made Sami Zayn look weak. It makes Gunther and Cody look weak to be losing to Sami Zayn in that fashion and then not have a proper comeuppance or really resolution to their arc that allegedly was happening. And apparently Cody and Gunther were feuding for the WWE title, which to me sounds pretty fun and kind of makes a lot of sense. I don't know how at this point though we got the Gunther, who I thought was a Raw staple, kind of on SmackDown. I assume that WWE fans know what's up with that. I assume there's a logistics to that does make sense, so I'm not going to harp on that there. I do think that Gunther going for the WWE title is super cool and something I would like to see, theoretically, right? But for the title to be passed around like this to this extent, same thing for Drew McIntyre, right? Is it great that he had the WWE Championship in Scotland, right, or in Glasgow, right? Yes, but it doesn't serve any story necessarily because now, especially with Drew, I know Drew was off filming, right? But Cody himself didn't really change in that feud with Drew that was supposed to really kind of psychologically break him in terms of like, having that, that Cody politeness, having that ruthlessness now tapped back into him, you know what I mean? And then, unfortunately, even with the Drew reign, it didn't feel like Cody really learned or lost anything from losing the title to Drew in the fashion that he did. You know what I mean? It just felt like a blimp to give Drew a notch essentially in his credentials. And I feel like a lot of WWE, what they do a lot of the time is that they want to give people notches in their credentials. I think that's the biggest reason to why John Cena is a 18 or 17 time world champion. I think that is done not because they're not thinking of the logic of, well, he lost it that many times, and that the reigns themselves should be something worthwhile. To them, it's a really, and that's WWE. It's always moments, and moments are what pop, right? But just to flip it, actually, even onto AEW, for example, currently Kenny Omega is the AEW World Champion, right? Do I think that's cool? Yes, but I do believe he should have initially won it early. Like, this is a very, very hot take. But I do think the whole Darby Allin reign and MJF kind of thing could have been pushed to the next year in favor of having a year-long build. I think in Kenny Omega having a really actual lasting second reign as a second or as a second reign as world champion, comparatively to being literally a transitional champion for Ospreay's ascension, where we're all looking forward to it. It's extremely predictable, similar to like a WrestleMania 40 situation where it's like, yeah, we know Cody's gonna probably finish the story at this point. This is the second time, but like, we're excited to see it because we know it's going to be a spectacle regardless because of the people involved, right? And between Ospreay and Omega, we know at the end of the day, once the bell rings for the match itself, right, that we're gonna get something out of this world, right? That will probably eclipse their promo work and everything, because it's the type of wrestlers that these men are. That's their best shows in the ring, right? We are here for their in-ring work, and that's the story that they tell anyway, right? The thing is, though, it's like to build hype, I think, for that All in Wembley stadium bout. I do think if they really and this is obviously because of injuries and timing, but I do think Kenny should have had a longer reign to pose as more of an actual threat to Ospreay, because it does genuinely feel like Kenny has this title as a transition to make the marquee match, rather than the flows of the story leading to this point. I think it would have felt more natural if let's say during one of those at Double or Nothing even, we had Omega win the title there, against Darby Allin, in a challenge where, like, this is a dream match we've never had yet. And I know it's two faces, but I think Kenny Omega and Darby Allin would have an insane match, Double or Nothing level main event match, and then you can have at least another month onto Omega's reign to make it, to bolster it, to make it feel like an actual title reign. I feel like a lot of times in certain regards, they're not, besides, like I said, Roman Reigns specifically, or certain times where they will specifically book a champion reign in actuality, they never actually do that. Another great example in which I was probably watching New Japan the most, the legendary 2-year Okada reign, right, that really only had 11 defenses, right, during this 2-year reign, kind of a similar amount of defenses to Roman's like 4-year, but it was every single match and every single time Okada got in the ring there, the melodrama, the expertise of the people he was in there with, Shibata, Ishii, Omega multiple times, Goto, all these people, Naito, there was always so much fanfare going into it for even the opposer, but Okada was seen as the final boss of New Japan, and there was so much prestige and honor that kind of came with these Okada World Heavyweight title matches, because it felt like the Okada was fighting to keep the title of the best wrestler in the world. We saw the belt itself start to kind of get dirty and silver. Okada's kind of Rainmaker persona started to get some more, chips on the paint, you know what I mean, due to the extensive wear and tear on him for that title reign. I think the match between him and Shibata, one of my favorite matches ever, exemplifies not only Shibata's like fighting spirit, right, and how he feels, but it's a great allegory for Okada's title reign, with how much he endured and how, despite even winning the match a lot of these times, he's not the one that comes out necessarily on top, maybe barely surviving, barely scraping by, in keeping that IWGP World Heavyweight title, and analyzing that and thinking about that, it's like him and Roman Reigns, some of the best modern title reigns in history, and a lot of the times, especially when, in times of where it might have not been the most hot thing, especially I think with Roman Reigns, for example, there was a lot of naysayers that were really hoping for him even at the point where he had unified the belts for a good year, 2 years, maybe year and a half, where we were, they were very vocalizing, we need something else, we need something, but to be honest, right, because he held the titles every single time that defense was happening, it was huge. There was prestige there. It was whoever takes this title, it was why when Cody beat Roman Reigns, it was the biggest thing to ever really happen in WWE history, because not only the way that they booked it with all the runs, you know what I mean, but what it symbolized, because it made it feel like the WWE title, that unified title, was like the key to the power in WWE. And the way that they excellently framed the whole situation with The Rock coming in and wanting to fight Roman off of some nepotism and stuff like that was an excellent play for them, and super masterful for them to then, play into the people's power type of thing, and like insert Cody into that, especially after the loss at 39, right, where we kind of felt the predictability would have led in a Cody win. We garner more sympathy. He feuded with Brock. He had a year that he went through essentially to come back to this moment. And, in Reigns giving Cody the keys, right, that WWE title win infinitely means more than even the title win he got from Cena that SummerSlam, I think. While I do think that's probably for Cody's character specifically, maybe him as well, a more significant passing of the torch as Cena is passing that kind of MO down to Cody as the next guy, which is literally more important. I do think WrestleMania 40's WWE title win for him is a lot more impactful, because the title at the time just meant so much more. It was the keys to the city. It was the power struggle, right? It was what Reigns was trying to hold on to this whole time, why he created this network, right? He created this bloodline, was for these titles, right? It became same thing with Okada. He was synonymous with those titles in his hand, They always say the man makes the belt. The belt does not make the man, and that is an absolute truth. I think, in especially right now, in terms where the belt itself is seen as more valuable than the person holding it, we get this devaluing of everything, where Sami Zayn gets it, and it gets to say he gets to like hold it for a little bit, but does that I think dwindles the value of then chasing for that title. Sami Zayn himself is going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's a WrestleMania main eventer. Him never winning the world title doesn't change that. But what it does is that it makes the world title and WWE title that much more prestigious, because not everyone can win that title. And even if you make it to the pinnacle of our sport in terms of WWE, in terms of main eventing like WrestleMania, for example, it might not always correlate to the excellence of winning that WWE title, which I think is extremely important, because if WWE wants to feel like sports, then they should do something. They should do that, because look at LeBron, right? For example, LeBron's legacy isn't the fact that he won all the titles all the time, right? It's the longevity and the excellence of his, 8 consecutive finals appearances, when he was playing in the East. The just like it's like consistency of excellence, right? That raises the prestige of everything. With Okada, and with how they usually just booked, when I was watching New Japan, the IWGP title in general. Like, there were times where I thought Naito should have won it off of Okada multiple times, and it just didn't happen. But then when it finally did, it was all so sweeter for when Naito finally, I think it was Wrestle Kingdom 13 or 14, when the Double Gold Dash, when he finally was able to hold both those titles. Or no, that might have been Kota Ibushi. I think Wrestle Kingdom 13 was Naito, and then the year after that, 14 was Ibushi. But just in general, like, because they held off so long, you know what I mean? You were able to build up a Kota Ibushi, for example. You're able to build up Naito eventually winning that title. You're able to build up Kenny Omega. Like, Okada's title reign, like, Kenny Omega himself was always going to have that ascension, right? But for Omega, to have that feud with Okada over the IWGP title, kind of over the length of his reign, has really built him up as a New Japan final boss as well, which I think everyone can kind of acknowledge. We don't necessarily say it in that respective text. I think we just say, Okada and Omega had like crazy 2016, 2017, 2018. But what that really was is that these two were kind of the opposites of like the same story that was happening, essentially. I think eventually, they kind of get a little bit crazy with it, with, having Omega win his own basically title, because they wanted to protect Okada. But then eventually, obviously, they met again for that fated fourth 2 out of 3 falls, right? But just in general, because of that, because of how many chances he had to hit, those matches being super close, it felt so real. These two were so par and par, neck and neck. They had the draw. Then Omega was able to beat him in the G1 climax under that pretense in less time. So then we had the fourth match, which was the best 2 out of 3. And it allowed us to really sink into the dynamic between those two specifically for the title, for example, and which we had with Cody and Roman, so now every time they kind of, get near each other, there's this tension, there's this excitement between these two alphas who are vouching for that top dog spot, for that title, and that's what really I think matters. It's like right now when you have, I think in AEW, the problem a little bit is that, in this transitional champion that Kenny Omega is right now, for Will Ospreay, there's no melodrama really in the week to week in terms of title defenses or anything for Omega, and I think that's like really the biggest problem with that on that side. So I do think in general right now, short title reigns are just not it. I think we need to come back and really have year-long title reigns. At least, like, to me, a WWE champion, for the most part, like, if I was a baseline, baseline 6 months. Like, I would not put the belt on somebody that I don't see as a booker. I would not put the belt on somebody I don't see holding it and doing ratings for me for at least 6 months. You know what I mean? I don't think, and obviously, there's a lot of stuff to kind of negate that, famously Mick Foley winning the title and the way he did really did move the trajectory. So it's like, yes, it is good to have the splunky underdog win it, but not every splunky underdog needs to win it. And that's my problem with Sami Zayn kind of winning that title. And especially the character that he is right now, it feels kind of smarmy, especially when the real Sammy is probably a good person, but in terms of WWE, Sammy is slime, and that's also the disconnect I think that happens for him to kind of negate that character and say like, no, the ride or die fans. No, that's not how that kind of works. It's almost a cognitive dissonance that I thought they were going to play into because it was so obvious, but they never really did. And maybe, him being slightly mad and throwing shit around because he lost the title is them playing into it. But if that's all we get, then I don't really care about WWE's idea of nuance, right? Whatever. Same thing with AEW. I do think, obviously, it's been really fun to watch because the wrestling's always fantastic. But in terms of the melodrama of the AEW world title, MJF was kind of a lot better with it, I think, in terms of, each reign, him possibly losing it, and then the melodrama of him building up the next opponent, So, I think MJF kind of even knows that himself in terms of stuff, but we'll see kind of what happens. I think if Ospreay wins the title here at Wembley, he's going to definitely have a super, or at least a lengthy reign, I would assume, and I think they want that kind of, year of Ospreay having just bangers and headliners with all the top talent for that title. I think that would kick off the 2026-2027 year like really great for them, going in to the winter or whatever. So we'll see. But in general, yeah, I just wanted to give my 2 cents on the idea that I do think title reigns and such could be. We could be doing a better job, I think, in terms of how we really book that out. I think there's more a merit to the person themselves being booked in a way that favors the championship rather than thinking the championship will then elevate somebody, right? I don't think that's ever the case. I mean, even the biggest guys will say that, and I think, WWE, they all know more than me. I understand, but my opinion of the whole thing is that, especially with these recent title reigns and stuff, you're devaluating the WWE title, especially. I think. I know Roman has the world title right now, so maybe that's kind of on purpose, but it does feel like a prop that's being passed around to tell stories rather than the championship MacGuffin that they're all vying for when you book it in this way. Same thing with AEW. It does feel like the placeholder for Omega Ospreay rather than it does feel like the world title. You know what I mean? I think, like I said, if Omega had a longer reign that exemplified or brought us back to the feeling that he had in that first reign, you know what I mean? I think we would have had more fanfare and in the idea that this is a world title match, because essentially to me it's like I think obviously Osprey's story going into it is about winning the big one, right, in the big stage, right? But I don't think that hits home as much actually with Omega as it does maybe with MJF, because MJF at least is trying his damnedest to hold on to that title, and there's a clear kind of heel face dynamic that you can have there. Whereas with Omega and Osprey now, it is definitely a much more complex and nuanced story that I don't even think really needs necessarily the AEW belt, you know what I mean? And it's more of a passing of torch and wrestling psychology and stuff like that than it is more about like passing the torch in terms of who's going to be the top AEW guy, period, right? But we'll see. Let me know what you guys kind of think. I'm kind of going to stop cutting these so short. I kind of want the whole thing to be kind of more of a relaxed talk. I still have the green screen, as you see. I have my microphone arm now, but I want kind of longer videos so I can put them out more consistently, like this one here. So let me know what you guys kind of think, kind of more of a ramble of just title reigns in general and what I think about them. And I do kind of miss the long title reigns of old in terms of, I guess, a couple of years ago. But let me know what you guys kind of think, and if you guys prefer the short title reigns, if that's more interesting to you, if that provides more of a compelling TV week to week. You know, we did have Darby Allin's really short title reigns, which was really fun, but we kind of did know it wasn't like anyone in those weeks of AEW television was going to take title off of him, maybe Takeshita, but I don't think even that. So, you know, let me know what you guys kind of think, and I'll see you guys when I see you.